Good morning. Welcome to Saturday Morning Coffee. My name is Lance McKinnon, and I'm here with my co-host Tiffany Linderman. Good morning, Tiffany. How are you this morning?
Cheers. I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing absolutely wonderful because I'm drinking Fifth Acres coffee from Good Brothers Cafe in downtown Harrisburg. So anybody out there who wants some great coffee, look up Good Brothers Cafe in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and get you some Fifth Acres. Great stuff.
I'm getting
Keeps you
low,
going up.
Lance. We got to put an order in. I'm just
Gotta put it
saying.
on there. All right, right after this. I might just drive up there or run up there. This stuff's so great. So, is it just you and I today, Tiff, or do we have a guest?
I would not leave you hanging. I have a friend here today, and I am just ready with my tissues. And you saw me pull those out right before. But we have a wonderful woman, a wonderful mom, and her name is Leslie Weirich, and she is a mental health youth activist or oh my goodness, advocate. But she's a lot of things. I may not be able to say it, but she's a lot of things, and she's on a mission to impact others' lives and make sure that they're aware of resources and things that they have. But at the end of the day, I want to let her share her story. Welcome, Leslie.
That is welcome. Good morning, Leslie. Thank you for joining us, and we are such honored to have you on this show. And you are a mom on a mission, and you are making an impact uh, all throughout the United States, overseas, youth, adults, in our military communities. And your story is very impactful, and we're truly honored. And folks, sit back, take all this in because there's a lot of nuggets you're going to take away from this. And as Tiffany says, you might need a tissue or two, but we're all going to get there. And again, thank you. I'm not going to steal your thunder, but welcome to Saturday Morning Coffee. And
Thank you, Lance, and thank you, Tiffany. I really appreciate you uh, giving me this platform to share our story. I wish I had a little bit of that good coffee with me this morning, but you'll have to send me some of those beans. Yeah.
We'll make sure you get some. We'll make sure everybody gets some of the Fifth Acres coffee. So
that sounds great. I love coffee. So I'll share a little bit of our backstory for your listeners so they'll understand a little bit more about who I am and what I do. And as you said, my name is Leslie Weirich. I live in northern Indiana. And 5 years ago, on September the 10th of 2016, which coincidentally happens to be World Suicide Prevention and Awareness Day, we lost our 20-year-old son, Austin, to suicide. He was quite a young man, and I'll tell you a little bit about our son. Austin was what the world would call an overachiever. He graduated above a 4.0, taking weighted honors his senior year of high school, receiving $26,000 in renewable academic scholarships, had college offers all over the country, played football and ran track all 4 years he was in high school, and was voted the scholar athlete in one or both of those sports. He actually even received an award that's only given to one high school student called the Hugh O'Brien Leadership Award. You actually have to be nominated by the principal. So if there is an award, an achievement, I mean, he was there. Very, very driven, very focused, very much into leadership and wanting to make the world a better place. And as I tell everyone, when I speak on suicide prevention now, I said, that's the face of suicide. That's the face of suicide. Suicide does not look like what we think it looks like. But what makes our story very, very rare and unique is our son actually attended one of the last three remaining all-male colleges in the United States, Wabash College. It's 45 minutes west of Indianapolis, very academically rigorous school, hard to get into. You have to have a high GPA, high SAT scores, and they're known for, building leaders. They say 1 out of every 10 Wabash grads is either CEO or president of the company in the first 8 years they graduate. Well, that sounds great, but there is a price that you pay for that type of driven personality. And in mental health, it really takes its toll. So on the 2-year anniversary of our son's death, which would be September 10th of 2018, the co-captain of our son's football team, a beautiful man by the name of Evan Hansen out of Carmel, Indiana, also died by suicide. So both young men playing on the same team at the same small all-male college at the same time, they knew each other, and they both died by suicide and by sheer coincidence on World Suicide Prevention and Awareness Day, exactly 2 years apart. So what happened at that point, Lance and Tiffany, was Evan's parents stepped out very quickly to speak about his death. And we were invited to share our story with his parents. And on Wednesday of that week, our story was in the Indianapolis Star, and both of our sons had very different backstories. I always say suicide is very unique and very individual. Everyone's backstory is different. Everyone's circumstances are unique. What leads up to that moment is different. But I happen to believe that no one dies of suicide. I happen to believe that people die of loss of hope in that single moment when they can't get to the next moment, when things are going to get better. And we can talk about that. So Evan, my son's suicide was about a relationship with a young woman, which many young men are. And then his teammate, Evan, his suicide was about CTE, chronic traumatic encephaly. Evan had been playing tackle football since he was 7 years old. And so his parents actually donated his body and his brain up to Boston, and it came back confirmed for CTE. And they have a wonderful foundation in Indianapolis. In fact, I worked their golf outing this past summer, and they raised $64,000 that day for Evan's scholarship. But they have a wonderful a concussion legacy foundation. They do a lot of work in concussion research. So they are doing really, really great work. We were blessed enough before we ever left the hospital that evening. My son was big and strong, 240 pounds, 6'4", defensive end football player. But we were able to donate both of his corneas, his heart valves, and all of his bone and tissue. So for us, before we left that hospital, it made us feel like we weren't leaving everything there. That we were walking out that morning knowing that there were families, there were parents, there were children, there were brothers and sisters getting calls that morning that their lives are being changed because of our son's decision to be an organ donor. And then within 2 weeks of Austin's death, the small beloved community that my kids grew up in, only one high school, Goshen, Indiana, where we're from, we had raised $20,000 for his high school scholarship. And in the past 5 years, we've given away 5 college scholarships. And this past year during the pandemic, we actually earmark his scholarship now for anyone who wants to go into the mental health field because we have such a shortage of therapists right now. Mm-hmm. So we're working on getting more people in the field of social work, psychology, psychiatry. We just cannot get enough people in the mental health field right now. So that's a little bit of our story. And I've been using it. So I started speaking kind of very organically. I was working full time and just started getting calls. After that article came out, I was contacted by the largest nonprofit in our state. And they actually put licensed clinical therapists in schools. And they asked me if I would be interested in being their keynote. This would be actually 3 years ago tonight. They asked me if I would be interested in being their keynote. And I had never done a keynote talk in my life. And I said, well, there's a lot of speakers that speak on mental health. And they were kind of like, well, we just want to hear your story. So my husband said, I think we should do it. I think you should do it. So I actually was the keynote speaker that evening. There were probably about 750 people at that event. In that evening, I got up and shared our story in 24 minutes. And I believe within 10 minutes of me getting off the stage that evening, they broke a fundraising record of $249,000 that evening to put licensed clinical therapists in schools. So that was kind of my aha moment where I knew our story had power, and it had power to change people's lives. It had power to raise money for mental health services. So I felt like I needed to continue speaking. I've been speaking all over the nation since that time. And as you know, COVID, as I say to everyone, COVID has done the marketing for what I do for a living now.
And first of all, I want to say condolences on your son and his best friend, and to the Evans family as well too.
Thank you.
Just want to first and foremost say that, and and to the families that have received life from that as well too. So I want to acknowledge them as well. But your strength is absolutely remarkable to be able to tell it. But we have that Christian in us is that sometimes we have to go through something. We have to be tested to have that testimony to be able to help others. And we never understand the why until that piece of the puzzle until it fits in.
Right.
And and this is one of those things. Unfortunately, we've had to have this tragedy to in order to help thousands, hundreds, millions of people who to bring this to light because this is a conversation to all of our listeners that impacts everybody.
Right.
It's impacted me. I've lost some close personal friends um, from taking their own lives. We talked about depression, suicide, anxiety.
Right.
I'm not afraid to say that I suffer from anxiety myself. Nobody ever wakes up and says, "Hey, I want to have anxiety. I want to have."
Right.
I never heard anybody say, "This is what I want," or
Right.
"It's just going to stop."
That's right, Lance. You're right. And I as we were preparing for Austin's celebration of life service, because we donated his organs, it was 2 weeks later, and I knew I wanted to speak, and I knew I wanted to talk about his life, not the way the last few minutes of his life ended, but I wanted to talk about his life. And I'm a woman of faith, and I claim a scripture verse for my program. It really hopped right in front of my eyes when I was planning to speak at his service. And I'm not a biblical scholar, but this verse speaks volumes about why I do what I do. And it's Genesis 50:20, which is about Joseph and his brothers. But it says, "You intended to harm me, but God used this for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." And I have so many stories. I have a lot of people tell me, "How can you go out and," I cry, and I always say, if I waited till I was no longer a grieving mom to tell my story, I'd never tell my story. I'm always going to be a grieving mom. I'm always going to tear up. But I always tell everybody, each time I share our story, a little part of my heart heals. And what really heals my heart is when I get stories back and text and email messages from people who've heard me speak. And I think one of my earlier talks that I gave was to a group of young women. And at the end of my talk, there was a young girl who ran out of the room at the back. She was in the back, and I honestly didn't even see her leave because my talks are very raw, they're very open, they're very honest. And so I didn't even really notice her leaving. And apparently she was one of 6 children. And the day before she came to my talk, she sat down and she wrote 5 letters to all of her siblings. And in those letters, she was saying goodbye. She had a plan. She had everything set up the next day to take her life. She came to my talk. She went home that evening, very emotional. She turned those letters into her mom. She said to her mom, "I never knew what suicide did to a family, and I almost did this to our family." And her mom texted me and called me. And that young woman now is a junior studying accounting at Indiana University. I have a lot of stories like that.
Yeah, that's. I'm trying to hold back. I'm not gonna lie, folks. I'm trying to hold back the tears because it's you know it's such relevance, and these are conversations that we have to have with our children. We
Yes.
can't let our kids just go upstairs to lock themselves into the bedroom. We have to be involved in their lives to a degree. You know, just from my
So
view,
Lance,
but
let's
that's
dispel
why.
one myth. You bring a good point up. Let's dispel one myth while we can. You cannot give your child, your teen, or anyone the idea of taking their life by asking them if they're thinking about it. Okay? That is false. Actually, studies show just the opposite. If you ask me today, Leslie, are you thinking of taking your own life? I would say, "No, Lance, I'm not," because that thought's not in my head. It's going to go on through. But if they do have suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, like this young woman who had a plan, when you bring up the topic and you ask them, are you thinking of harming yourself? Are you thinking, and you have to use this language, which it's really hard for parents, very hard. I know it's an uncomfortable conversation. Are you thinking of taking your own life? Are you thinking of killing yourself? When you ask that question, what happens is it actually opens up the door. They know you've noticed their pain. They know you're paying attention, and you're giving them permission to talk about it. It's the most life-saving thing you can do. And I will tell you, there's something called QPR. QPR stands for question, persuade, and refer. It's the CPR of mental health. And a lot of states mandate that teachers all have to have a QPR course. It is only a 2.5 to 3 hour course. And it is a great course for every parent to take. At least one adult in each house needs to be QPR trained. That helps you know how to open up the conversation, what to ask, and if they're really at risk of harming themselves, how to get help for them. So I think that's very, very important for people to know. You cannot give someone the idea of taking their own lives by asking them, but you can keep them from taking their own lives by asking them.
That's amazing. I know a lot about CPR, as we talked about my background in the healthcare field, but no, I had no clue that there was something called QPR, and I absolutely love that. And I feel like if teachers or healthcare professionals, myself, I can see myself, if I can, I'm going to go sign up for it, because I think that any person, having and knowing the signs to look for and helping people through that is extremely important, because you don't know the time and the place that that's going to be so critical for someone's lives. And I also want to just acknowledge my condolences to you and the immense strength that you have, that you literally poured yourself completely into what you do, to be able to give back to others and make that difference. So it's absolutely incredible. But I did have a question, as you talked about, you showed the life, like this is what suicide looks like. Are there signs and symptoms that I call it signs and symptoms, I'm going back to my clinical self, so I apologize. Signs and symptoms that you look for in someone that are essentially what we could potentially look at to prevent someone going into that suicide thoughts, or knowing what the signs are to prevent something? Because I think you're absolutely correct. I think we envision a lot of people being depressed and cowering in the corner as the prime example of what that is. But the way you put it is losing hope, or feeling like there is no hope, is really what people have in that moment to make that decision. So I'd love to hear.
That's a great question, Tiffany. And it's one that I get asked a lot because I speak in schools quite a bit. I speak at fundraisers. I speak all over. So it's a complicated question to answer with just a yes or no. Yes, there are signs. People will always ask me, did I see warning signs with our son? And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And I answer it in two ways. I said, yes, I saw warning signs, and no, I saw no warning signs. And let me give you a little story about my son, the last day of my son's life. So we are people of faith. My husband always would text a scripture verse in the morning, and the one that he's texted to Austin was about hope. And so Austin texted his dad back, Dad, I hope you have a hope-filled day. Love, Austin. Later on that afternoon at 1:30 that afternoon, my son FaceTimed me. We talked for 45 minutes. I mean, he was on top of the world. He told me about the classes he was taking that semester. He'd made a decision not to play football because he'd had some back-to-back injuries his freshman and sophomore year. So he was going to stay focused on getting ready for graduate school. And so he was really enjoying that semester without kind of the pressure of football, So we had a great conversation. And then at 4:30 that afternoon, my son lifted weights and worked out. At 6 o'clock that evening, he called his dad to catch up with him. And they talked for a few minutes about kind of the football games coming up that weekend and everything. So and then approximately 5 hours later, my son took his life. He was with his friends at a restaurant an hour and a half before he took his life. And I'm sharing his story with you to give you a little more information on the young brain. So, and as Evan as well, even though their circumstances were different. And I am going to answer your question about the signs in a minute. So you can get to a situation where you can have someone like Austin, who was displaying no signs in that last day up until the last moment. It's very, very important when you talk about suicide prevention that young people understand how their brain works and how their brain doesn't work. And I'm going to get to these signs in a minute. So when I teach in health education classes, which I do frequently, we talk about stress and we talk about the brain. Now, when we're young and when we're even older, we have what's called our big three emotions. Our big three emotions are anger, anxiety, and sadness. So I'll say to the kids, I'll give them examples, like raise your hand if, when something goes wrong in your life, you get mad about it. Like that's your go-to emotion. And then they'll raise their hands. We'll go through each of the emotions. So then I talk to them about their amygdala, which is the back of their brain, which is that fight or flight place where everything, you're a nurse, Tiffany, so you understand that. So when you're young, your prefrontal cortex, which is the front of our brains, they used to say, research scientists used to say, it's fully developed when you're 25 years old. Well, they pushed that back, and a few years ago, it's now 27 years old. That prefrontal cortex, guess what happens up there? Anger management, self-control, impulse control, higher level decision-making, everything we need for life, right? Everything we need to make any kind of good decision with. So you take a young person, and I have a PowerPoint, and I show my son's, picture. You can see he was 6'4", 240 pounds, big defensive end football player. And I say to these young people, he looked like a man, didn't he? But he had the brain of a young boy. He had 7 more years before his impulse control, anger management, and decision making, right, was fully developed. So in that evening, in the heat of an argument with a young woman, his brain failed him. As I say, my son died of loss of hope in that single moment because his brain could not effectively make a decision that, as overwhelmed as I am in anger and sadness right now, it's not going to last forever. And if I can hold on and get to 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now, and I'm going to tell you about 2 tools that I give to every young person to help them hold on. And if I can so it's getting them past that impulsive state where, this is the end of the world. They can't, because I do believe that no matter how suicidal any person is, adult, teen, whatever your age, no one wants to end their life. They want to stop their pain. And their brain is overwhelmed because that amygdala, those big 3 emotions, anger, anxiety, sadness, they've hijacked their brain temporarily. And they don't have a prefrontal cortex developed to go, ooh, this is bad, but it's not going to last forever. So they make an impulsive decision. They make a permanent decision about a temporary problem. So if you would look at my son, you would say there were no warning signs that day. Now I say there are classic warning signs in some people, and in other people, you don't see any. So classic warning signs, Tiffany, to really answer your question, I always tell everybody, any change in behavior. I tell teachers, look for anything. If this kid has always arrived early to class and now they're late every day, or if they sat in the front of the class and now they want to be in the back, or if they hung around a certain group of friends, then you never see them with those friends anymore. Or if they didn't hang around a certain group of friends and you're seeing them around new friends, any change in behavior. And then we talk about triggers. So triggers can be anything that's a change from going from middle school to high school, going from high school to college, maybe making a move in the middle of the summer, parents getting divorced, anything, any life change can be triggering because guess what? They don't have that fully developed prefrontal cortex to be able to handle the emotions that come with that change. And so I know that was a long answer to your question, but and I can send you a link and I can give you some links, and QPR has a lot of the good information about warning signs and how to speak to your children or anyone you love when you see those signs. But there's classic signs, and I always tell everybody, giving away your belongings, reckless behavior. Like maybe you were a health nut and you always worked out, and then all of a sudden you're eating junk food and you don't care what you eat anymore. So anything that's out of the ordinary that is not typical of that person's personality, that can be a warning sign. Does that answer your question?
Oh, absolutely. I think you said a lot, but I think at the end of the story, it's really simple. It is, like you said, a change in what that person normally does. And I had no idea that the brain did not develop until that late in a child or teenager's life. And I have an 8-year-old daughter, and just I think any parent, anyone that you love, thinking about this, you would hate to ever think that they would be in that moment. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about those things. Like, we've moved, when she gets older and goes to college, there's things that are part of life that are going to happen. You can't protect them from everything. And you try to do so much to make sure that child, your loved one, whomever they are, that they feel safe and secure and they know they have someone to go to. And I can only imagine you being that person. As you shared your story and your son, you were there, your husband was there every moment throughout that day. And so, I mean, what else? I don't know what else you could have done. But I think the key in what you're, going to share with us too, is that there are tools and resources for people to be prepared in those moments when they feel like there's nothing else, no other option for them.
And can I just piggyback on that real quick? Because I know that we're talking about our loved ones and family members and stuff like that too. But and Tiffany, and as you know, I'm a big advocate for talking to strangers. When I go to the grocery store, I'm there for a gallon of milk. I might be gone an hour and a half because I'm talking to everybody in the store. But sometimes talking to a stranger, you have to pay attention to what they're saying because you might be that outlet. As you had mentioned earlier, you might be that one person that that changes that thought. Like after I get off my shift, the cashier, the person who's pushing the carts, the person in the toll booth. You might be that one person. So that's why I always say, stop what you're doing, stop being busy, get off your phone, make conversation. Never walk past somebody without acknowledging them. And I say that in a way of acknowledging is it might not have to be a conversation. It's just you walk past them and you notice they're there because they have built up this wall that nobody's ever seen them at all. So I just wanted to add that in there.
It's great. And you guys are giving me a good segue into what I like to talk about. So Tiffany was asking me about warning signs, risk factors. So, and I can talk about those all day long, but I really love to talk about protective factors. Protective factors, building them in our kids, what I call the upstream approach. Before our kids are ready to jump off the bridge, we want to build resiliency in them. So not if, but when the tough times come, this is their go-to, right? And I was hired this past year, a year ago, I was contacted by our community mental health center, Oak Lawn Community Mental Health, where I live. I cover 2 counties for them. And then outside of those 2 counties, I have my own organization, Leslie's Hope, where I go and speak all over the nation. But one of the things, and one of the, we have partnered together this past year, and I'm really excited to talk about, is a program called Sources of Strength. And Sources of Strength is a suicide prevention program that teaches kids and anyone, not even just kids, anyone, but teaches young people 8 protective factors that we all have in our lives, depending on, our background. We might have 2 of them, we might have 3 of them, we might have 4 of them. And what we say, Lance, is just what you were just describing. This is, guess what we say in Sources of Strength? Connection is protection. So whenever you go out, and I always tell everybody, don't isolate, even though COVID tried to isolate the world, let's stay connected, because you never know. And you just said it, you never know when you can stop a person from attempting to take their life with one comment, with one, how's it going today, with one. And I don't know if you're familiar with Kevin Hines, but he's the most famous man whoever attempted suicide and survived. And Kevin Hines jumped off the San Francisco Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, which that used to be the #1 suicide magnet in the world where people went to take their lives. Well, Kevin's story is remarkable, and he has a book, he has a movie. His book is called Cracked, Not Broken. He has a movie, Suicide, the Ripple Effect. But Kevin, this is almost 20 years ago, Kevin talks about how when he went there to die that day, a woman came up to him and asked him if he would take her picture. And he took her picture, and then she just walked away. If she would have at any moment turned around and said, "How are you doing today? How's it going?" Just that simple comment. But when she walked away, his brain, his immature prefrontal cortex said, "Nobody cares." And he jumped, and he's got a miraculous story. I don't want to ruin the story for the people that want to watch the movie or read the book, but he travels and speaks all over the world. And he was the speaker that I listened to that presented this Sources of Strength program. And so our community mental health center and we have partnered together, and we have implemented it in 4 school districts this past year. And it teaches kids through 8 protective factors. Now, we have them differently in our lives, or they show up differently in our lives. But those protective factors are family support. And we know family can look different for everyone. Some kids have chosen family, some kids have adopted family. So family support, positive friends, mentors, and January is National Mentoring Month. So I do want to make a comment about mentors. If you put a mentor in a young person's life, say middle school, high school age, and they stay with them, they are 80% less likely to develop an alcohol or substance abuse problem. 80% less likely with the mentor. What percentage of suicide has drugs or alcohol involved? Over 50%. So mentors are critical. So on our wheel, what we call our wellness wheel with the Sources of Strength, we have family support, positive friends, and mentors. Those are the who in your life. Who is in your life? The next 3 things on the wheel are what we do. That's healthy activities, and that's not always sports. That can be going out and stargazing at night. That can be a healthy activity. Generosity, and we teach the kids, I tell them generosity is my superpower. We talk about helping others helps you feel better. And I tell these kids in middle schools and high schools, I'm like, you know what that looks like? You come into school in the morning and everybody's running up and down the hall, hanging out, and you see one kid standing over there in the corner, and you know they're having a bad morning. You go over there and you're like, "How's it going, man?" That's generosity. That's generosity. It doesn't have to cost you a dime. Spirituality. We talk about spirituality and faith on this wheel, and that can look different for all the kids too. And then the last 2 are where we go, and that's our physical health and our mental health. So the 8 protective factors are family support, positive friends, mentors, healthy activities, generosity, spirituality, physical health, and mental health. And so what we do, we teach. So the way this program works, and the beauty of it is it's a peer-led program. The students run it, which is phenomenal. So we go in there, we do a 90-minute all-staff training. We call it a wellness hour, a wellness hour and a half, with every staff. I mean, I want the people that work in the cafeteria. I want the bus drivers. I want everyone who has a touch point with the student to be in this training. And what we do is we kind of fill their bucket. We teach them what their source of strength is first on this wheel. They all leave with the wheel. They all know what their sources of strength are. We want them to post them up in their room, on their bus, wherever they are. Conversation starter with these kids, right? And so what we say is, when you take those big 3 emotions, right? When I get angry, I call a mentor. I text a positive friend. I, walk out in the middle of the night and look up at the stars, something bigger than me, spirituality. So we teach them how to use their sources of strength on this wheel. And we all have them. And we teach them if you don't have one, you can build it in there. And so these are called protective factors. And the more protective factors we can build in our lives early on, before we're on the bridge ready to jump off, right? We call it the upstream approach. So we build this as early as we can in these kids' lives. So we go in, we do the all staff training, and then from there, the teachers nominate peer leaders. And we take ideally in a perfect pre-COVID world, I'll say, we want 10% of the student population to be peer leaders. And a peer leader, and like we say, we want it to be diverse. So influencers. So a peer leader, we don't want the whole football team to be peer leaders. We want one football player. We don't want all the cheerleaders. We want one cheerleader. We want one kid who's a gamer. We want one kid who's goth, maybe. And you'll have teachers say, you know, Leslie, you don't want him to be a peer leader. He's a behavioral problem in my class. And I've said to those teachers, I said, no, he's an influencer. I do want him to be a peer leader, and I just need to teach him a new script. So we get the peer leaders, we get 10% of the diverse student population. From that, we take 7 to 10, for every 7 to 10 peer leaders, we have one adult advisor. Now, the adult advisors don't even need to come from the school. A lot of times they will, teachers, coaches, but I love youth pastors. I love people working in the community that want to volunteer. I want the community to buy into this program because we're changing a culture, not just a school, but a culture. And then from that point on, we have a 6-hour training with the adult advisors and the peer leaders. And then 2 weeks later, we start meeting twice a month, and we give them a budget to run a PSA, a positive a messaging campaign. And so say 1 month, they might have a TikTok video. What's your source of strength this month? Or what's your generosity look like this month? We run 6 to 9 PSA campaigns through the year. And at the end of the year, we have a big celebration with, we bring in a big speaker, and then we're always bringing in new peer leaders because kids are graduating every year. And this program reduces violence, school bullying, reduces suicide attempts. It's now currently used in almost all 50 states and Canada. It's a wonderful program. And I am just a Sources of Strength evangelist. I believe in this program so much. And the first school to implement it is my son's high school, Goshen High School, where we live.
That is phenomenal, and I couldn't agree 100% more. Especially, that is a phenomenal program, and the way I want to go back to the youth and the teenagers, the way the world has looked for them in schooling, being cooped up, and then get back into school, and then being cooped up again. Business people, office workers, executive jobs. You having a C-level job, and now you're hustling to try to get unemployment and put food on your table. This program is bigger than life.
It's exciting for us because I'll tell you, Lance and Tiffany, we live in the RV capital of the world. So all the recreational motorhomes, vehicles, they're all made where we live. And we've been really excited because we didn't even wait for grants. We went out and started presenting this program to the business leaders in our community. And the RV industry has done very well during COVID. So these kids that are struggling with their mental health, these kids we're losing to suicide, are the children of their employees, right? So they want this program and they need this program. So we've received private funding, which has been wonderful through a lot of our local businesses. But here's a really important data point on this program. A peer leader, AKA another student, right, is 4 times more likely to identify an early warning risk of another kid who's about to harm himself before an adult in the building would. So what you do is you build these relationships between these peer leaders and these adult advisors. You break that code of silence and you save lives. And we couldn't be more excited that this program has come into our area. And I started my certification. There's a 2-year certification process. It's based out of Colorado. So I attended a week-long training last summer, and I'm logging in my hours to become a fully certified Sources of Strength trainer. And I want to bring it to as many school districts. As I shared with you and Tiffany, I'm not young, I'm 62. So I only have limited years that I can work. And I want to make sure my legacy is that we brought Sources of Strength into as many schools as possible. And I'm bringing in young trainers and developing them. So this program will continue to go on.
And it must go on. It will go on because there's nothing but success behind it, because I think all of our listeners listening to this, moms, dads, we have a variety of people listening to it. like I said earlier on in the segment, there's going to be a lot of nuggets, strong nuggets that we're going to be able to take away from this conversation, which is a hard conversation to have, um, but it's a must conversation. Um,
Yes.
and we need to be able to talk about it. And I'll just tell a quick story. Earlier today, I got my hair cut. As I was getting my hair cut, but I grew up in the '80s. You didn't say in the '80s, I'm struggling with anxiety.
Right.
That now you would that would
Or
have
the
been
90s or the
or that,
2000s.
no, that would have been taboo. People would have looked at you like you had three heads. Oh, folks, our listeners, our followers, it is okay to
Mhm.
ask for help.
Mhm.
Okay, it is okay because help is out there. There's a
Right.
lot of help out there. So
Right.
never be embarrassed. And I can't say this strongly enough. Never be embarrassed to ask for help from a friend, a neighbor, a stranger, the janitor. Um, just never be afraid to ask for help because people are willing to help you. And if it's going to save your life, and never be ashamed to opening up your feelings.
And just to draw a little picture of how prevalent suicide is, I don't come from a large state. I'm in Indiana. We are losing someone every 8 hours to suicide. That's 90 people a month. Can you imagine if we had a rare form of cancer in my state right now that was taking 90 lives a month? We would be earmarking research dollars to find a cure for that cancer. This is a preventable form of death. And I was just invited to speak at Fort Bliss Army Base the week before Christmas in El Paso, Texas. I was invited by the chaplain. He called me last summer. Our military, our young soldiers are really struggling with their mental health, especially since the pandemic. And so they invited me because they have had 20 suicides on that base in the past 15 months. So the chaplain said, we bring in a lot of speakers, but I need them to hear a real story and I need to hear it. I need them to hear a mom. So I went there. I spoke to 4,400 soldiers. I did 7 talks in 4 days. And can I tell you the very first email message that I received the first night I was there? I went back to my hotel through my website was from a mom of a soldier who was in my talk that day. And she said, I don't know what you said, but because of your talk, you opened up a conversation that I'm having with my son right now that I would have never had. And one thing I want everybody to know, and I share this with everywhere I speak, if you have struggled with depression or anxiety or suicidal ideation or ideas of self-harm, guess what? You're normal. You're normal. We have all struggled. We have all had moments when life is hard and we just don't know how we're going to make it. And one thing I started asking a lot of the teens when I speak, and I say, and I want to tell you about a couple practical tools that I use in my talks. I ask them, I say, this is a judgment-free zone. When we're in here, I let them know that whatever is said in there or shared in there stays in there. And I said, I don't want you to worry about who's sitting beside you. I want you to just think about what I'm about to ask you and be honest, judgment-free. How many of you have had a day in the last 2 weeks when you just didn't think you could be here tomorrow and you weren't going to make it? And 70 to 80% of the hands go up in every classroom, every classroom. Then I say to them, what if you had a way that you could reach out, someone could be there for you 24/7, free of charge, just to listen, not to judge you? Would you use that tool? Would you? They all raise their hands. I started getting funding through my supporters on LinkedIn. And I have my own organization, Leslie's Hope, and I take the text crisis hotline wristbands. Just says leslieshope.org, my organization. Text the word home to 741-741. A trained counselor will respond to that text in under 5 minutes. So what I tell them is they each leave my talk with a wristband. And I remind them, it's the middle of the night. You feel like you're all alone. You don't have anybody to talk to. No one understands. Look at your wrist. look at your wrist and text that number, because you have to give them practical tools because of that immature prefrontal cortex, because that brain is so impulsive. So you have to make tools like the go-to for them. The second tool I give them, because they all have phones, right? The second tool I give them is an app. I ask them to download this app called Not Okay. The Not Okay app is a simple GPS locator. You can put up to 5 trusted contacts in there, up to 5. You can put 3, you can put 2. I tell them the more you have, the better. And here's why, but I always tell them, I remind them, now remember, you can't put your friends in your Not Okay app because their brains are not developed yet, right? You have to put people over the age of 27, trusted adult. I talk to them a lot about finding a mentor in their lives. And then you upload your 5 trusted contacts. Those people have to accept so they know they're in your Not Okay app. I pull up my phone. I show them I have the app on my phone. I tell them I have bad days. I said, you don't even need to be suicidal to use this. You just need to be having a bad day, right? And then I tell them, I said, if you're at a party and you get in trouble, where you got in a fight and broke up with your boyfriend or girlfriend, you click Not Okay. You have a covenant agreement with your trusted contact, your trusted circle in there of contacts. So that will send out a signal to them. And somebody will say, hey, I got Lance, I'm on my way. I'm with him now. So the rest of the people in the circle will know. So between that GPS locator app and that text crisis hotline wristband, they've got it on their phone, they've got it on their wrist. They have 2 practical tools to keep them alive during that impulsive moment when they want to make a permanent decision about a temporary problem. So does that make sense?
Absolutely, because those midnight hours when it's quiet, that's when your brain, you can't stop your brain.
Right.
But the day you're busy, the phone's ringing, people are around, you're texting, people are up. Is when the sun sets,
Right.
there's long nights.
Right.
To see the sunrise.
Right.
To see the sunrise. And we want everybody to see the sunrise again.
To be here tomorrow. Mm-hmm.
Yes, to be here tomorrow. And Leslie, I know that you are a woman that's just so magnificent. And I know we're going to talk more for hours and hours and hours. And I see where we're going with this. But I know that you're extremely busy. But I know that we just only gave our followers and our listeners just a little bit. But I know it was a lot of information, and we're going to make sure that everybody gets this information. And God bless you.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Tiffany, for inviting me. Yeah.
What you're doing, and I know that there's greatness that comes from tragedy, and this is such greatness, and your legacy. You say you're 62, but you're really only 32 because your legacy is going to live far beyond. And
well, and I think, Lance, if I could leave your listeners with one thing, just to remind them that no matter how bad they're feeling right now in this moment, it is not going to last forever. And to hold on, because I promise them, if they will hold on 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes, they will feel differently. And one thing I remind everybody of when they're in a good place, okay, is to take an index card, just a little index card, any kind of card, and write down your reasons for being here. You can put reasons for living, reasons for being here, okay? Like mine would be my husband, my daughter, long walks in the country. I live in the country, just anything that really lifts your spirits. Put down 3 to 4 of those, okay? Then for young people, what I tell them to do is to take a picture of it and put it on their phone, okay? If they're having a bad day or they know they're kind of going into that blue time of the year, they're just struggling with something, look at that 3 times a day. Look at it 3 times a day, every day, okay? And then your reasons for living will help you, and it'll help your brain chemistry hold on when you're in that moment and you feel like you don't want to be here. Remind yourself, here are my reasons for living, okay? And then connection is protection. The other important thing, make sure you have somebody to reach out to, have a person, have the text crisis hotline, have your trusted circle in the Not Okay app. because we want you to be here tomorrow. Because as I said, it only takes 1 second of hope to be here tomorrow.
Yes. I'm Tiffany's speechless.
I am speechless. I know we're wrapping it up here. That's perfectly said. I almost didn't want to ruin it by saying anything more after, but the amount of resources you gave is absolutely incredible. There are so many things. My mind right now, I'm just like, to know that there is an app like that, that so many people can make sure that they have to it could be used for so many things, but this is a perfect use to be able to just make sure you have somebody there when you need them to be there.
Absolutely.
And I love the wristbands. Hopefully we can find out. I'm sure we'll find a way.
I can send you some. I can send you some. So my website is Leslie's Hope, just one word, LESLIES Hope, HOPE, one word, .org. And they can reach me at leslieshope.org. I can also tell people where I get the wristbands. I buy them here in the US. They're made in Houston, but they can put them in memory of someone they love. They can put and then text the word. And the reason, I'll add real quickly, that I use the text crisis hotline, because it all goes back to that immature prefrontal cortex. Teens are not going to dial the 10-digit suicide hotline number. They just aren't going to dial 10 numbers, but they will text. They're texters. So that's why I use the text crisis hotline number. And in July of this year, we will have a 3-digit suicide number. And once that's up and running, I will put those on my wristband too.
That's incredible.
And that should be in every state, every school, business, church, grocery store. And again, I cannot thank you. I am really emotionally moved, again, and honored. And I really look forward to working with you in the future. And I see a lot of greatness. And folks, use it. The help's there.
I also add one other thing, Lance, before we wrap up. I'm just going to put it out there, Leslie. You tell me if I shouldn't be doing this right now, but we heard that you have a talk coming up here in a month or two. Do you just want to share that really quickly before we end?
Sure. And that's going to be an emotional day for me. I was actually invited to my son's college to give a TEDx talk on March the 26th at Wabash College. And my TEDx talk, as I say, I will tell people many times my son died of perfectionism because he was so hard on himself. And those high achieving, and, our culture has that kind of, grit mentality where we've got to grit ourselves through anything. Well, my talk is really going to be about the high cost of perfectionism on our mental health. So I'm looking forward to giving that. I say I'll either be, it'll be my first or last TEDx talk, depending on how well it's received. But I am going to talk about really mental health in the high performers and the high achievers and the cost of that on our mental health.
You're going to blow it up. There won't be a dry eye in the place. I'm pretty certain of it.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you so much. I appreciate you allowing me to share my story with you this morning.
No, thank you very much. And, today we saved a life.
Hope so.
So,
yes.
And thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Bye.
Thank you, Tiffany.